Hi everyone, hope you're doing well. Ren here, welcome to my room. Hope you are gonna have a lovely Sunday. In this video, I'm just gonna launch into the INFJ Thoughts mode and try to sort of update discussions about the relationship between like myself and writing, the INFJ and writing, as I have experienced it ever since I was a young adolescent, maybe an old adolescent. I don't know. I started writing, like creatively writing, when I was 16 years old. I think I was 16 when I started. Yeah, I was in not quite the last year of high school, the year like prior to that one. So I was 16, and this year I'll turn 32 in April. I'm an Aries, INFJ, as some of you know. And I'll be twice the age that I was when I started writing creatively. So that's quite interesting. It means that, by April of this year, I'll have spent half of my life writing, creatively writing, dedicating to it. I think undoubtedly more time than to any other possible activity, literally. Because I think ever since 2015 or thereabouts, I've been writing weekly, almost daily. I'd say like 2015 to 2018, I was writing like either every 3 days or every 2 days, with some breaks, but that was kind of the rhythm. And really ever since last year, May of last year, I believe, ever since May of last year, I've been writing daily. And this has done great things for my sense of purpose, for my sense of meaning in life. But that's just me, but my relationship with writing has always been one that is not merely a creative relationship, but also a therapeutic relationship, a way for me to express myself. And I think in some ways a way for me to express my NI vision, because a lot of the time when I've shared stuff with people, not all the time, but a lot of the time, people would say things like, well, I liked it, but it was not necessarily clear to me what you were getting at, or it's just kind of mysterious, obscure, hard to penetrate, sometimes leaving people a little bit alienated, I guess, to an extent. And it's really interesting because you could see the parallel. Not that I would compare myself to these people at all, but with works by INFJ filmmakers like Tarkovsky, Malick, and others, and David Lynch, supposing he's INFJ, where often it's almost like the point is not only to understand the story in a traditional sense, it's also to get a feel of an insight that maybe we'll make sense of in the future, or we'll make sense of in a way that is not like completely cognized in a conscious way, but expressed through other means. So I think that my approach to writing has often been like that. I'm writing mostly philosophy these days, but that has only been the case for about 4 years. In 2015, I started a series of aphorisms that I called Works of Chance. It's available on my blog for my creative writing. There's a link to it on my channel page. Maybe I'll link it in the description box if I think about it. So yeah, like for quite a few years, I was publishing. I was writing like series of aphorisms, expressing my vision, trying to not just express my vision because it sounds kind of pretentious, but like expressing expressing something about my vision so that I would sort of get a better grasp of what that vision was, like, you know, what those thoughts were. Because I think undoubtedly, if there is one feature of my mind that to me is like really feels NI, it's that it's hard to quite make sense of what it's providing me with insight wise. Like it's really just something that I need to work on. I need to work it out and write it down and sort of dismantle it a little bit and then like sort of reassemble it before I can sort of realize what it's been aiming at, and then to realize that the vision is much more unified than it seemed, that all the various aphorisms, the stuff that I was writing down, and you could see on my blog that it sometimes seems to go in a bunch of different directions. It's all connected to this vision of open oneness that I develop in my philosophy. Now, before 2015, I was mostly writing fiction. Although that's not quite true, I guess, because fiction is quite a specific thing. I was not necessarily writing fiction, but I was doing like actually creative writing per se, not philosophical writing. So I was an art student. You know, when I was in my formative years, around that time when I was trying to come to grips with what my vocation was, I very much wanted to be a literary person, a literary man. Like my plan was not to be a scientist, not to be, which I'm not, although I am technically a political scientist, at least by training. I didn't want to be a philosopher. I wanted to be a writer. So I went through different phases. You know, I think from age 16 to 19, I kind of wanted to be a poet. So I was doing mostly poetry. A lot of the time I was partly therapeutic also, you know, I was expressing my states of feeling. I'm someone who used to fall in love or become infatuated rather, because love is something different. I know now that I experience it. But I used to become infatuated with people very easily and to feel things very intensely, and I've always been very romantic at heart, so the poetic medium was always like something great for me to just express things. What's interesting is that I think even then, even though my TI was less developed than it is now, I was still injecting quite a bit of TI in my poems. You know, they're kind of, it's weird because they express a longing and they express something romantically intense often, or at least emotionally intense. But there is something a little calculated and cerebral about them. And I remember when I was starting to share my poems in the first 2 years I was writing in French, and then like I moved to Ireland, and progressively I started dabbling in writing poetry in English. And I had a blog, I created a blog, and I shared it with some friends and people from the drama society, from the literary society in the university where I was in Ireland, and people were saying that the poems were quite interesting and they were kind of mysterious, evocative often. Some of them were really not good, but others were interesting at least. But often that they were lacking, it's not that they were lacking a human touch, it's that I was not willing to completely divulge myself, and in a way it felt like the screen that was protecting me was the cerebral screen. So you can really see that even in this writing at this early stage, there's a correspondence between that and like stuff that I've described before about the fact that in my life I tend to have this cerebral screen as a kind of protection against the possibility of being too much emotionally exposed to others. All this coming from actually is a place of, I don't want to say oversensitivity, because I'm starting to think that there's no such thing as too sensitive, but hypersensitivity, let's say. Marcel Proust, the writer that I'm reading at the moment, he's very much like that too. Yeah, and he's aware of it. He's self-aware, like, you know, at least in this respect, he calls himself hypersensitive. And yeah, so it was really interesting to see how, like, even at that early stage, like, I used TI, I used NI. I don't think the FE was super present then. Now, I think at age 20, I sort of effected a departure from focusing on poetry towards focusing on plays and drama. So I was in Ireland, still more involved with the Drama Society there in the university where I was studying. By then I was still doing my bachelor's degree in literature and history. And yeah, I started writing plays. So the first play that I wrote, I submitted to the Drama Society. It was called M Will Come. M like the letter M, Will Come. And it was kind of a, not a reinterpretation, but it was imagined as like a reversal of Waiting for Godot. I don't know if you guys have read Waiting for Godot. I was big into like Samuel Beckett and James Joyce at the time. I think that both Beckett and Joyce are anti-dominants. I think it's very, very clear in the case of Beckett. I think it's also clear in the case of Joyce. I would say that Beckett is more likely an INTJ rather than an INFJ. But anyway, both anti-doms, and probably my biggest influences at the time, especially Beckett. And for a few years in that university, people call me, like, as a joke, the anti-Beckett or the reverse Beckett, because my plays reminded them of Beckett, but also I was a Frenchman writing in English in Ireland. Beckett is Irish, and he wrote a lot of his plays in French first in Paris, I think. And then some of them he translated, no, all of them he translated into English. I think he was his own translator. And so it's weird, because he was an INTJ and IDOM. At the time, obviously, I didn't have these concepts. Although technically I had already done the test once, years before, but I'd completely forgotten about it. And so I had that play, M Will Come out. It was performed. Actually, I got to co-direct it, so that was my first experience directing people as well. I was co-directing it with a guy called Luke, who was very good at helping me just become more familiar with directing. I think he was clearly an INFP himself, and yeah, and it was shown. I think it was performed 2 or 3 times, and it was a full house both times. So that was an amazing feeling, seeing my play performed and having actors just play my characters. It was really, and it's so funny because the play is very strange. About, you know, like, instead of Waiting for Godot, like, where you have these people just waiting for no real reason, and the absurdity of that situation, M Will Come is about people who are waiting for someone who will most definitely come, even though they would like him not to come. So that's kind of a reverse situation, but also very existentially angsty in a way. And it was a very strange play, and it was performed, and people were playing it, like, you know, with all the heart. And I've always had a very good relationship with my actors. I call them my actors. You know, there's a protective side to me that comes out in these cases. Always had a very good relationship with them, and usually they've played in several of my productions. I've written 6 plays in total, I think. First it's called Album Will Come, and then, like, the second play, again, weird conceptual play, a short little piece about a man who will never, like, a man who is very thin, who doesn't eat a lot. There's a lot of men who don't eat a lot in my place. At that time, I was going through a bit of a phase myself of having some eating disorder. Not a very acute one, but I was too thin, and I had some very idiosyncratic and I would say eccentric eating habits. You know, the main character in M Will Come is called W, so it's reverse M, and he's the brother. And he only eats bread and apples. And it's one of the first things that you know about him. And I did eat a lot of bread at the time. I still do, I'm a Frenchman, but I was eating too much bread. Not enough of other things. That same guy, Owen, who was a friend, I think he lives in Sweden now. We've lost touch, since then, unfortunately. But he was the main actor in the play about this guy, this thin guy, who was wearing his pajamas all the time, and he was obsessed with the washing machine, which he was comparing to a heart, and the whole play is about that. And the washing machine. There was a washing machine on stage. I was working with a friend who was like a genius of sounds, and he was creating all these washing machine sounds, and that was supposed to evoke the pulsations of the heart, the palpitations, the rushing. So you had this whole analogy going through the play. So like a weird anti-vision thing there again that perplexed a lot of people, I think. But still, it was fun to do it. And the guy who played the character of M in M Will Come also was in it, and there were a few other people. Then after that, I went through a phase of like writing plays that were not performed because they were really, really so conceptual that like it would have been just really, really hard to get the required budget for the set that I would have liked. One that was called Dome. It's kind of an Orwellian play, I would say. It was influenced by my readings of like 1984 and other stuff. And then another play called Green Square. That was like some kind of satire of a green utopia that is not green at all, and that is populated by people who are really in search for meaning, but kind of failing to develop it. And the characters in Green Square, I wrote poems about them as well that I published on the blog. So that was kind of something that I was playing with. I would like to maybe put that to stage, but then, I don't know, toward the moment when it almost became a possibility for me to put it to the stage, I kind of had gone past it. I'd become a little bit dissatisfied with some parts, and so it's kind of like, I'd rather wait for an opportunity to do something else. And then in 2012, I was lucky to have a play selected for a festival called 10 Days in Dublin. So it was part of a festival performed in one of the oldest theatres in Dublin. Really great. And that play was called The Wedding Party, and it was my first attempt at writing like a realistic play, just about a wedding party that doesn't go well, with four main characters of four. So the bride and the groom, then the best friends of the groom, and the sister of the bride. And tensions that had been building up over the past few years that in a way were supposed maybe to be resolved by the wedding actually sort of come to the surface and explode. And I would say that in that play, like I was aiming towards something less conceptual, much more existential, I would say, but existential in as direct and non-cerebral a sense as possible. And at that time, I was very influenced by the works of Soren Kierkegaard and people like that, Sartre as well, and actually even experimented. I would say I would call it an experiment now, but like it was well, yeah, I mean, I joined a religious community for about 6 months, I would say. I went to mass on Saturdays, 2 hours long. I didn't go all the time, but I went quite regularly. And then I didn't stick around because I realized that my interest was too individual, too intellectual, and I lacked the faith that was I felt to be necessary to to be part of this, and I just lost my patience with the masses, so I didn't stick around after all. But the play that I wrote around that time, the wedding party, it was influenced by just some existential questionings. Instead of conceptualizing them, instead of like keeping them within I think I tried to make them more accessible and more direct, more raw in a way. And I'm still quite happy with that play. It was nice, and it was nice to have it performed in that theater. So that was the last play I wrote. No, actually, I wrote one more play that I'd started writing way earlier, but I finished it in Switzerland. It's called Jean in French. It's my only play in French, Jean, and it's once again a kind of conceptual play about a love story in a post-apocalyptic kind of town surrounded by a wasteland, where people have become alienated from themselves almost. They're kind of shadows of themselves, but like there are two people who fall in love, and it's an exploration of this love and how like they struggle to express it, given how their personalities have been affected by the apocalypse, or by what happens. There's something that happens, and so like it's almost like they lack some like a palette of emotions that would allow them to express how they feel completely, but they'd find ways to express it nonetheless, because it's still very strong and very potent, and it's a beautiful love story, and I'm very happy with that play. Hopefully one day I'll get to have it staged, in some capacity. That would be nice. So and then to conclude, I'll make another video on that maybe at some point, because the video was already really long. Basically, in 2015 to 2017, more or less, I wrote a novel. It's called The Fountain and the Well. Yeah, that's big NI vision once again. But I will talk about The Fountain and the Well. It's a 400-page book format. It's like it's 100 and something thousand words. I submitted it to like 40 publishers last year, and it was rejected unilaterally, like by all of them. So I'm not sure if it's quite ready. I think that a friend of mine has read the whole thing, which is kind of incredible, like reading a book. A friend of mine, and he has emphasized flaws in the narrative, a certain lack of character development that it's normal for a first-time novel to be guilty of. But I think I'm not sure it's worthy of being published as is. Probably should rework it if I think it's worth reworking at some point, but at the moment I'm really focused on the philosophy. But The Fountain and the Well, still like my first attempt at a novel, and it's quite an interesting story, and there's a wealth of ideas, I think, and insights, also mixing with my philosophical insights. The Fountain and the Well in fiction explores a lot of the insights of open monism that I develop in more technical and philosophical fashion in my current notebook, and that's kind of really what I'm focusing on now. I don't like to just do two things at the same time, just one big project after another, and I always need one. Maybe after the philosophy I'll return to The Fountain and the Well, or to something else, we'll see. But I'm really focused on the philosophy now, and I'll talk about The Fountain and the Well in more detail in a future video. Okay. So yeah, it's been a long video, so I'll stop here. I just wanted to give you a little bit of an insight into what my activity as a writer has been, and how it relates to my personality developments, to my character traits, to my concerns, to my hopes, and to my history as a human being. I hope you enjoy it. Let me know in the comments if you do, and if you have any feedback, any impressions, do share them with me. Cheers, guys, and talk to you soon.